we have chosen a very significant topic for discussion today, particularly reminding ourselves of the harm done by the Balfour Declaration 100 years ago. Harm done not only to the Palestinian people, but to the notion of justice itself in the world community, particularly to the downtrodden people who were oppressed by imperialism in its different forms. The Balfour Declaration, that one paragraph declaration by Arthur Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, written to Lord Rothschild, who was the leader of British Zionist organization at that point of time. That declaration addressed to the Zionist organization, even though released to the press as the government's own position, British government's position on what was then called the Jewish question. What we should remember is this is not the first incident that was happening in a chain of events, but this was the most significant political event in the sense that Britain was controlling a large chunk of the world at that time, the empire where the sun never set, and the biggest power of the time was giving its consent and its recognition to the Jewish quest for what they call in the declaration as a national home for the Jews in Palestine. The events were occurring particularly from the late 19th century, when the World Zionist Organization itself was formed, and the first World Zionist Congress, the convention, was held in Basel in Switzerland in 1897. The 1897 World Zionist Organization's conference is extremely significant. This was done not by, Jewish people from within Palestine or Iraq or Egypt or Iran or India or other parts of the world. The conference was held by representatives from the Western world, from Europe in particular. So European Jews organizing themselves in the World Zionist Organization, European Jews talking about establishing their own state in some part of the world. And most of these Jews who organized the conference were not that kind of a believing Jews by any means. Very few of them were. They were called secular Jews. And therefore it was a political project, not a religious project at that point of time. Particularly in the context of Europe, where the Jewish people felt that the existing European political systems and arrangements made them second-class citizens. And therefore, the European Jewish traders commercialists, industrialists, and others felt that in the European colonization project, whether it was in West Asia or North Africa or various parts of Asia, the national bourgeoisie, as we call them, the big business people, who could do their colonial endeavors elsewhere. But the Jewish people in Europe were kept out of this in the name of what's called anti-Semitism. And so the Jewish bourgeoisie was trying to have its own colonial project. And the 1897 conference was, in a sense, a colonial project initiated in the name of Zionism in order to colonize some place. It was not completely declared by that time. But in the conference, there was some agreement because they thought about Latin America, they thought about Africa. And when it was proposed that Palestine would be the best place because there can be a religious connection that can also be established, which will give them legitimacy for their colonization project in the name of the Promised Land. Returning to the Promised Land will have some political legitimacy that they could achieve. If you say it's a colonial project from European bourgeoisie to come to an Asian region like Palestine, in a general sense, nobody will agree with it. But if it is couched in religious terms, there will be some legitimacy. And therefore, most of these either non-believers or secular Jews were determining now not only the fate of what Judaism itself should represent politically, which is an assault to their own religious people, and therefore, from the very beginning, Zionism was opposed by many Jews. Anti-Zionist Jewish tradition is as huge as Zionist Jewish tradition. And it was a total affront to the other religions within the region, particularly to Islam and to Christianity within Palestine. And in that context, what we should remember is that when they started the project in 1897 in an organized form, establishment of the World Zionist Organization, the conference, and the resolutions there. The resolution clearly stated, Theodor Herzl, who was the organizer of the conference, himself drafted that by stating that there should be colonization of Palestine. And a colonial fund for that has to be established. And colonization in today's sense, because we have gone through anti-colonial movements, etc., may mean much more, but at that time, it's simple transplantation of the Jewish entity to Palestine from Europe, because non-European Jews were not in their thinking. And therefore, when they started this project, and then the funds came in, the Theodor Herzl himself announced that within 50 years we will do it. And that is from the time that you could see that Zionist, what we today call Zionist lobbying, pressurizing governments influencing governments, seeking support to organizing funds, and later organizing the militias and the military wings, and undertaking. So you could see that all these things were done, from influencing to influencing world leaders, to governments, mobilizing funds, organizing military, and so on and so forth, in a chain of events, started from the late 19th century. And the influence put on the British government was part and parcel of this project of establishing in Palestine a Jewish national home, as it was mentioned in the Balfour Declaration. So the Balfour Declaration was coming after Chaim Weizmann's own influence, the Zionist organization's influence, the Zionist fund devoting a lot of money and efforts for that, and therefore the British government could be convinced. And it is not a very strange thing that Britain, as a colonial power, colonial European power, found some value in assisting Jewish Zionist project, which again, as I've told you, is a colonial project of Jewish bourgeoisie in Europe. And therefore they have common interests in that sense. And therefore the British government's assurance to the Zionists that we will support the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine was corollary to the colonial and imperialist interest of both the entities, of Britain as a colonial power and Zionism as a colonial ideology. And the people of Palestine had to bear the brunt. Mostly the Arab people, the Muslims and the Christians, and also the Jewish people in Palestine, the traditional Jewish people. Even now, if you look at the state of Israel, the difference between the Ashkenazis and the Sephardis, the European Jews and the traditional Jews, the Asian Jews, is tremendous. I've heard many stories of Jews from my own state, from Kerala, who have gone to Israel, how they were treated initially. And the racial issue, you might have seen racial, race riots in the city of Tel Aviv, as recently as last year, between the whites and the black people, and how the Falashas, the Ethiopian Jews, were treated, was also an example of the kind of difference that existed between European Jewish community and Asian Jewish community. Politically, they could be incorporated into this project of national home. And therefore, the major contradiction, even though there was the contradiction between the European Jews and the Asian Jews, but the major political contradiction was between the European Jewish immigration to Palestine and their interest in Palestine and the Arab inhabitants of Palestine. So that was the fight that emerged. And it, in a way, was reflected in Palestine as two national sentiments at odds with each other. One was an imperialist-produced nationalism in the form of Zionism. The other was an anti-imperialist form of nationalism in the initial days as Arab nationalism, and then particularly as Palestinian nationalism. This was very important, that the territory, the land that belonged to the Arabs were now being occupied by European Jewish community. And British declaration in 1917 is changing the shape of things in the sense that during that First World War, when this was declared, they already knew, even though they promised different things in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was the secret agreement earlier, they said that Palestine will not be part of the French British division of the area. It will be somewhat an international entity. And there was the promise to have Jerusalem as a separate entity. There was promise to the Arabs that once the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the Arabs will be granted freedom. And on the other side, you have a declaration like this promising national home for the Jews. So totally contradictory positions emerging, but Britain knew it very well that it will take up the rule of Palestine once the war is over. And you know that Britain and France divided among themselves the region in order to control them. New colonial administration was established under the League of Nations mandate, and Palestine going to British mandate, like Syria, Lebanon, etc., going to the French mandate. And therefore, Balfour Declaration in 1917, early 20s, you have British mandatory power fully established in Palestine. And British colonial administration now, which can implement its national home promise for the Jews in Palestine, because they are having the authority to do so. And you should remember the League of Nations. It's supposed to be an international organization after the First World War, isn't it? What was the terms of the mandate? The terms of the mandate was that Britain and France saying that, we should rule these countries because they do not have the ability to rule themselves. And the civilized nations have to take up the responsibility to rule, to administer these regions until they acquire such powers as to rule themselves. Colonialism, writ large, in those kinds of mandatory provisions, that Britain and France has that white man's burden of liberating all of us, because we do not have, the Palestinian people themselves do not have, or the French, or the Syrians, or the Lebanese, or the Iraqis do not have the ability to rule themselves. And they are determining that we don't have that ability to rule ourselves. And so you see the imperialist and colonial logic being repeated in the formation of Zionism as a movement, in British colonialism and its support to the Palestinian cause through Balfour Declaration, and in the League of Nations mandatory provisions for Palestine. All these coming together, creating a situation where the Arab people of Palestine did not have any other option but to wage their Intifada, as it was called, in the 1930s, the big movement that erupted. And you could see by this time the militarization of the Jewish immigrants from Europe have started in a big manner. And this is precisely when the support for the Palestinian cause was coming from countries like India, which were also under British colonial rule. And therefore there was that kind of unison, that kind of solidarity between the nationalist struggles against imperialism, both within countries like India and in the Arab world in general, and in Palestine in particular. And now I see in recent times, in our midst, an attempt at rewriting our own histories, of this solidarity and support to the Arab cause, to the Palestinian cause, that came up during that intense battle with imperialism as a solidarity movement. That history of solidarity, that history of anti-colonial struggle itself is now being undermined. Not only with the government's shift towards Israel, etc., but also through the intellectual section, the academics and others now concentrating more on rewriting history. You know that has been happening in various fields, in school syllabuses and other things for quite a long time. But our own immediate past like this is being revisited in very different ways now. And this is in the context in which that famous statement by Mahatma Gandhi came about. Not only those extremely famous statements that Palestine belongs to the Arabs in the same sense as Britain belongs to the British and France to the French, but also the starting point of that article in the Harijan, where he mentioned that my sympathies are with the Jews because they were being massacred in Germany at that point of time when he was writing. But following that sentence, immediately he says that, but my sympathies will not blind me from the requirements of justice. That's the exact words that he said. And that quest for justice comes not only from an ethical standpoint of a leader and a movement at that point of time, which is also a political statement about justice. In the whole context of British imperialism, this is very, very important. And that solidarity that I was mentioning, coming out during this imperialist era, is what is totally missing from our debates now. And for the Palestinian people, colonialism and imperialism is not a thing of the past. And imperialism is not a thing of the past for any of us for that. But colonialism in its older form, that Zionist colonialism which proposed in 1897 to colonize Palestine, and its continuing effort, the 48 establishment of the State of Israel, 67 war, and the complete control over Palestinian lands by that Zionist endeavor and its nation state that it was established. It established for itself in 48. all that cumulatively creating colonial conditions in Palestine. And anti-colonial struggles in the occupied Palestinian territories is an ongoing struggle. It's not a thing of the past. And this is precisely where the moments of our solidarity during our anti-colonial struggle to the Palestinian people have to be rekindled, because the ongoing reality has to be recognized as a colonial condition within Palestine in its worst form. Colonial wars, what happened in Gaza and other kinds of events, I need not remind you, and what's happening on an everyday scale with checkpoints, with the obstruction of daily life of the Palestinian people in the West Bank, and the intermittent attack on Gaza, and the struggles that the Palestinians have to go through. And therefore, I'll stop by saying that the initial alignment of colonial forces, both British colonialism and Zionism as a European colonial idea, that has played havoc with the lives of the Palestinians. And it's a continuing legacy of colonial and imperialist power and influence and war over people. And therefore, as people who have been through these struggles against colonialism and imperialism, it's our duty to be with the Palestinian people at these extremely difficult times in their political history, where mobilizing themselves against the Zionist rule of Israel is becoming all the more difficult because of the way in which most part of the Palestinian lands now being occupied by not only the Jewish state of Israel, but also by Jewish settlements in most part of the West Bank. And in this context, I declare my solidarity to the Palestinian struggle for their independent existence and independent state. And I hope this kind of a meeting basically is intended for showing that solidarity. Thank you very much.